never made it, but I know what it takes. I'm motivated by a mix of emotion. Got my statement, and I'm reading it slow so I can understand it fully. Appreciate my standing, go out of this world and right on time. Oh, never in my life have I seen the sky light up like this. I'm far away from Earth and I wanna know if you exist. Mission control, do you read me? Send me my coordinates lately. Mission control, am I drifting? Tie me to someone who will love me, yeah. Wait, I think I'll last a bit longer. Fine.
Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd family YouTube video. Wherever you are, whatever you may be doing, thank you so much for making Ref Brandon and the Todd family a part of your day. We always greatly appreciate it. It's hard to believe that after all of yesterday's college football action, we are now 1/3 of the way through the 2022 college football regular season. Today here on the channel, we're going to be talking about all the games of note from yesterday. Any thoughts on it? As always, please feel free to let me know. The game of the day, according to a lot of people, was the noon game, and that was Clemson and Wake Forest. Clemson comes away with the win, 51-45 in double overtime. Now, this was a great game if you like just seeing good old football, because this was one of few games that you'll ever see that neither team had a turnover. So both offenses played great. The only bad part about it was it exposed how weak Clemson's secondary was. And I told everybody before the season that if Clemson had one weakness, it was their secondary. And it would show against teams that had good passing games. Clemson only has 3 guys in the defensive backfield that are good. Not great, but good. There are only 3 decent defensive backs we have, and all 3 of them were out. And everybody else we have in the secondary is just absolute trash. And Dabo talked about it after the game, but he didn't blame it on injuries, because you can't. Injuries happen. Every team in the country has injuries. So you can't use that for an excuse. He just said our secondary has to cover better. It was bad. It was either try to blitz the quarterback, but if you don't get to him, there's going to be wide open receivers, or it's play man-to-man and just keep getting beat deep down the field, play after play, or it's get beat down the field, tackle the man, and take the penalty as opposed to giving up the touchdown. And that's what happened a lot of the time yesterday. But Clemson does come away with the win. Now, they play NC State next week. That game's already been announced as the ABC primetime 7:30 game. It might be 2 top 10 teams. We'll find out later on today when the new poll comes out whether or not NC State cracks the top 10. They might, with a couple of top 10 teams losing yesterday. But if not, it'll at least be 2 teams in the top 12 or top 13 against each other. Of course, Clemson's going to be favored, being the home team. They now have won 10 straight games dating back to last season, which is the longest winning streak in the nation. I definitely think Clemson being the home team next week gives them the advantage. But the game yesterday went to overtime, tied at 38. In the first overtime, both teams scored, made it 45-45. And then in the second overtime, Clemson scored and didn't get the 2-point conversion, and they actually held Wake Forest. But DJ was 26 of 41 for 372 yards. and 5 touchdown passes, and again, no interceptions. And he had 14 carries, 53 yards. And of course, we know in the college game, sacks count towards your rushing yardage. So on designed run plays, he actually averaged more than 5 yards per carry. And Will Shipley also averaged more than 5 yards per carry. He had 20 carries for 102 yards. Now, our secondary is pitiful. It's going to be pitiful all year long. But in the second half, especially the fourth quarter, Wake Forest ran the ball a lot, and our guys just didn't tackle. So our defense has a long way to go. Luckily, NC State's a lot slower paced, a more methodical offense than Wake Forest is. So even if our secondary gets burnt a few times, it shouldn't result in that many points. But it was a great, great game. Wake Forest offense is hard to stop. They run the mesh. If you've never seen the mesh offense, it is hard to stop. It makes them unique. That's what they need to do because they can't just line up and beat teams one-on-one because they just don't have the talent other teams do. And that's why I always thought that Georgia Tech running the option was a great idea for Georgia Tech because they didn't have the talent other teams did. They can't just line up, beat teams one-on-one. They didn't have the talent. When you don't have the talent other teams do, you can't line up and play the same kind of football they do and beat them. You're not good enough. So Georgia Tech needed the option, and Wake Forest needs the mesh. The only thing the mesh needs is a quarterback who's actually mobile, because if they had a mobile quarterback, the mesh would be better than it already is, but it's still pretty doggone good. Michigan defeated Maryland 34-27. Another great noon game yesterday. I know the noon games are supposed to be the weakest games of the day as far as time goes, and then 3:30 the games get better, and then prime time the games get better. But there was some good noon games yesterday. We also had Baylor defeating Iowa State 31-24, and Auburn beat Missouri in the battle of the mediocre Tiger teams. Well, you have one that's the Tigers in Missouri, and then you have Auburn, who's half Tiger, half War Eagle. But the game was 14-14 the entire second half. Neither team scored in the second half, and then in overtime, Auburn got the field goal, and then Missouri actually fumbled into the end zone and lost the game 17-14. And then the battle of the undefeated basketball schools, Kansas defeats Duke 35-27 to go to 4-0 on the season. It won't be long until you'll hear all these teams talking about how they're going to hire Lance Leipold, the Kansas coach, because in a year and a half, he has already turned that program around. And then we had Tennessee finally beating Florida 38-33. They were actually up 38-21 with about 7 minutes to go and tried their best to give it away, but hung on in the end. Texas Tech defeats Texas in overtime 37-34. And then we have Notre Dame defeating North Carolina by the score of 45-32. And North Carolina's defense is so bad that I believe if they played UMass, who is one of the worst, if not the worst teams in Division I football, I think UMass would score 40. That's how bad the Tar Heels defense is. And then Cincinnati defeats Indiana by the score of 45-24. James Madison defeats Appalachian State 32-28. And then we had Iowa defeating Rutgers by the score of 27-10. Iowa is 3-1 this season, and I believe they've scored a total of 50 points on offense. They scored 27 last night, but only 13 on offense because they had a pick six for a touchdown and a fumble return for a touchdown on defense. And then we know when they played South Dakota State in week number 1, they won 7-3, but only scored 3 points on offense because they had 2 safeties in the game. might be the first team in a long time to put up 50 points in 4 games, and they're 3-1 on the season. But it's because their defense has given up 23 points in 4 games. So if you give up 6 points a game, you're going to win a lot of football games. And then Texas A&M defeats Arkansas by the score of 23-21. That was one of the top 10 teams that I mentioned earlier that went down on Saturday. It was a good game. I think it was a lot lower scoring than a lot of people thought it would be. A&M continues to show that their offense is just average at best. That's what it is. I don't care who the quarterback is. Their offense is just average. And then Florida State all over Boston College, 44-14. Last year, Boston College coach was one of those coaches that a lot of teams were saying they wanted because of how good Boston College looked. And now all of a sudden, 4 games into the season, and Boston College looks terrible. And I think everybody's surprised by it because their quarterback is a possible first-round draft pick, and they've got a wide receiver, Zay Flowers, who might be a first-round draft pick. But their offensive line is absolutely pitiful. So Boston College is in for a long football season. Ohio State all over Wisconsin by the score of 52-21. And then we had another top 10 team going down last night when Oklahoma fell to Kansas State 41-34. I don't know what it is about Kansas State, but it seems like every time the Sooners play them, the game always comes down to the wire. And if Kansas State doesn't pull it out, they almost pull it out. 2 weeks ago, looking at that game, you'd have thought, oh, that'll be a good game. And then last week, Kansas State went out and just laid an absolute complete egg against Tulane. So after that game, you were like, well, never mind, Kansas State sucks. And then last night, Adrian Martinez looked the best he's looked in his 95 years of playing college football. He looked good last night. And then we had a extremely low-scoring game, especially with the Lincoln Riley coached offense, but USC defeats Oregon State by the score of 17-14. I know I mentioned in Friday's video that I thought Oregon State would hang with them, and they did, but I thought they would score more points than that, so it was a good game like I expected. I just expected it to be a higher scoring good game. I thought it'd be something like 31-28, 34-28, somewhere along in there. And then a couple of games that didn't look like they'd be good when you saw the schedule, but turned out to be good. And that was Middle Tennessee State defeating Miami 45-31. So I guess just proves that, just like I said for the season started, Miami's not back. I don't trust Mario Cristobal. I watched him too many games at Oregon, and there was too many games that Oregon just came out looking flat. There was 2 or 3 games every year where it looked like Oregon just stayed on the bus and put just regular students in uniforms, put them on the field because they looked that bad. And I thought if Oregon was that way under Cristobal, Miami would be. And if you recall, 2 weeks ago when they played Southern Miss, they looked pitiful in that game to the fourth quarter. And then they laid a complete egg versus A&M last week. And then yesterday, they just got dominated. The Blue Raiders went up and down the field on Miami's defense. So just like I said, they're not back yet. Before the season started, they were saying, oh, we're going to be better. And when asked why, they just said, oh, because we say so. Well, you're not better because you say so. You're better because you prove it. And they're proving that they're just another average Miami team that claims they're great, but they're not. Cristobal's supposed to be great, but he's not. The man can recruit, but the man just flat out can't coach. And then we had a close game that came down to the wire. Oregon defeats Washington State 44-41. The Ducks were behind most of the game, but had a huge fourth quarter offensive-wise and won the game by 3. And then a game that just makes Nebraska look pitiful. The Miami of Ohio Redhawks defeated Northwestern 17-14. Northwestern's now 1-3 on the season, and their lone win came against Nebraska. So that just makes Nebraska look flat out pitiful. Enjoy your NFL Sunday and Monday Night Football coming up tomorrow night. And as always, any thoughts on any of the games from yesterday, please feel free to let me know. Let's go ahead and get our dad joke of the day in here. I put up a high voltage electric fence around my house. My neighbor is dead against it. And that wraps it up for today's Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.